He walked into Courtroom Two expecting judgment. But by the time he left, the judge was the one in handcuffs. This isn't just a story about law. It's about power, race, and the quiet strength that exposes injustice in the very room meant to protect it. If this is your first time here, let us know where you're watching from the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And if you believe in stories that challenge corruption, restore dignity, and bring real change, hit like, subscribe, and follow. We bring powerful stories like this every day. Now, let's witness what really happened in Brookhaven Courtroom 2. Inside Courtroom 2 of the Brookhaven District Courthouse, fluorescent lights cast a stark white glare across the polished wooden floor. A cold beam as frigid as the atmosphere that hung heavy over the room. The gallery was full, yet no one spoke. Only the faint rustling of papers, nervous whispers, and the rhythmic tap of high heels echoed against the courthouse's soaring dome. At the center of the room, standing within the curved horseshoe of the defense podium, Jordan Hale stood motionless, a living statue. The black man in his 40s wore a tailored navy blue suit, a neatly knotted tie, and shoes polished to a mirror shine. His posture showed no retreat, squared shoulders, chin held high, eyes locked on the judge's bench where Judge Evelyn Rourke, 62, sat with a face that betrayed her barely concealed irritation. Jordan knew that look. He had seen it before, in the military, on the streets, and now in the very heart of so-called justice. It wasn't just indifference. It was calculated contempt, the kind that said his mere presence disrupted the order Judge Rourke believed she alone upheld. From the bench, Judge Evelyn Rourke adjusted her glasses, skimmed the file before her, and struck the gavel sharply. The crackle would rang out, a sound as cutting as a gunshot, the opening note of a trial that would be anything but fair. Case hashtag 274, B, State of Georgia, she said, her voice dry and clipped. The defendant, Jordan Hale, is charged with impersonating a federal agent to unlawfully interfere with a civil investigation. She squinted at him, her expression that of someone forced to scrub away a stain. I don't have all day for nonsense, she muttered. Then louder, more pointed. Proceed. And consider this your warning. Don't try anything. The front row stirred. An elderly woman placed a hand over her chest, as though personally affronted on behalf of the man on trial. But Jordan? He didn't flinch, didn't lower his eyes, didn't furrow his brow. He only shifted the corner of his mouth, just barely. A smirk? A weary whisper to himself? Here we go again. A breeze swept into the towering glass windows, fluttering the American flag that hung solemnly against the far wall, in a room where justice was meant to reside. An invisible storm was gathering. Jordan wasn't afraid. He hadn't survived thousands of hours of training, near-death deployments, just to fold beneath the weight of one woman's disdainful glare. The lights hit his face, a face that was no longer young, but not yet old, weathered, hardened, a face that bore the mark of experience and resolve. And there he stood, not merely a defendant, but a man carrying a story much bigger than himself. And today, while the rest of the courtroom expected just another routine hearing, Jordan Hale knew this would be anything but ordinary. He remained standing tall, gaze locked on the judge's bench. The sting of the first insult hadn't even settled in the air before Judge Evelyn Rourke leaned forward, placing both hands firmly on the dark wooden table in front of her. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was cold enough to send a chill down every spine in the room. Men like you, she began, dragging each word out as though she were chewing before spitting it, always think you can sidestep the law, always looking for ways to dodge responsibility. A sharp exhale came from the gallery. Someone shook their head. Another lowered their gaze, ashamed on his behalf. Jordan didn't move, but inside, something cracked against the armor calm he had forged through years in uniform. He'd heard words like that before, from street criminals and badge-wearing colleagues alike. But rarely had he heard them spoken so openly, so venomously, in a room that claimed to be the heart of justice. You people, Rourke continued, her eyes sweeping the room like a blade. You come in here with your badges, your promises, your arrogance. But the law is the law, and I don't fall for tricks. Her voice hit the courtroom floor like a hammer on cold iron. This was no longer cross-examination. This was a lecture, dripping in prejudice, dressed in the black robes of authority. Jordan tilted his head slightly. His eyes weren't cold anymore. They held something deeper. Disappointment. He had hoped, even if faintly, that this time would be different. That in front of a person cloaked in black, he'd be seen through the lens of justice, not through the fog of bias. "I'm sorry, Your Honor," Jordan said, his voice low but clear. "I'm not sure who exactly you people refers to, but I didn't come here asking for privilege." "You know exactly who I mean." Rourke snapped back, her tone sharp as metal. "Black men always think they're above the law, but not in my courtroom, not while I hold the gavel." The air grew thick, as if someone had drawn a curtain across the light. Assistant District Attorney Kimberly Tran looked up, her eyes caught between discomfort and disbelief. Deputy Raymond Cole, the courtroom bailiff, shifted his weight from one foot to the other, glancing at Jordan, then quickly looking away. Jordan blinked once, then slowly placed a hand on the defense table. He said nothing more. There was no need. Everything that needed to be said, she had already said herself. Etched into the wood behind the judge's bench was a line in bold capital letters: "Equal justice under law." Jordan stared at it for a long moment, and then he thought, maybe it's time someone reminded her that the law was not built to serve arrogance. And maybe today, that someone was him. The anger in the courtroom didn't come from shouting. It came from the kind of silence that pressed down like a hell breath, as if the entire room was waiting to exhale. Judge Evelyn Rourke leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. Her eyes were half-lidded, full of disdain and smug superiority. "Nothing more to say," she sneered. "I figured with that holier-than-thou posture, you'd treat us to some tear-jerker defense speech." Jordan didn't reply. He simply exhaled, slowly, not from exhaustion, but as a way to release emotion that no longer served him. Rourke's contempt didn't touch him the way she thought it did. Years in the military, and later with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, had taught him something fundamental. True power never has to raise its voice. Jordan calmly reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket, his eyes never leaving the woman cloaked in black robes above him. A few in the gallery held their breath. Deputy Raymond Cole, on instinct, shifted his hand closer to the holster at his hip. But Jordan didn't draw a weapon. Instead, under the sterile white lights, a small metal object glinted in his palm. He raised it slowly, holding it high for all to see. An oval-shaped badge, gold-rimmed, its lettering sharp and unmistakable. Federal Bureau of Investigation. The courtroom froze. Judge Rourke narrowed her eyes. Her lips pressed into a hard line. ADA Kimberly Tran dropped the pen in her hand. Several people in the gallery looked up, whispering between gasps. "Oh my God! He's an agent?" Jordan didn't need to yell. He didn't need to declare anything. He simply lowered the badge and placed it on the table, where it caught the light. A silent proclamation. "Your Honor," he said calmly, his words falling like pebbles into a still lake. "I had hoped today would bring a fair hearing, but it seems I'll need to remind you, I am not someone you get to insult without consequence." Judge Rourke jerked her chin, voice laced with sarcasm. "And I'm supposed to believe that toy is real? Plenty of people buy knockoff badges online and stroll in here thinking they own the place." Jordan said nothing. He reached into another pocket. This time, he pulled out a laminated FBI identification card. Blue, silver-bordered, complete with his photo, embossed seal, and an official badge number. From the FBI Southeastern Division, Georgia HQ. He stepped forward. No anger. No request for permission. He placed the ID directly on the bench before her. "You're welcome to call FBI headquarters in Georgia to verify it," Jordan said, his voice smooth as velvet, his eyes sharp as a blade. "I'm certain they'd love to receive that call." This time, Rourke didn't answer immediately. She looked down at the ID, then back at Jordan. The ever-present smugness on her face began to shift into something else. Doubt. And in that moment, the first crack in her composure appeared, clear and unmistakable, on the face of a woman who had spent her career controlling every room she entered. Judge Evelyn Rourke squinted at the FBI identification card, lying silently before her. For a long beat, she said nothing. Her eyes scanned every detail. The photograph, the agent number, the raised seal, the faint silver federal emblem beneath the transparent laminate. She swallowed hard, then looked up, her gaze now sharpened like a blade. As if she were clawing to reclaim control the moment it slipped from her grip. "Well played," she said bitterly. "I'll give you that. You rehearsed this little performance well, Agent Hale." Jordan didn't respond. He simply stood, hands clasped in front of him, his gaze steady, no longer seeing her as a judge, but as a suspect under interrogation lights. Deputy Raymond Cole cast a nervous glance toward the bench, clearly unsure. He didn't know whether to stand still or intervene. Assistant District Attorney Kimberly Tran bowed her head, pretending to organize files. But the tight grip she had on her pen betrayed how tense she truly was. "You think I'm a fool?" Rourke snapped. "You think a badge and an idea are enough to get one over on me? I've seen imposters 100 times smoother than you." Jordan let out the faintest scoff. "You're not a fool," he said, every word precise. "But it seems you've gotten used to a room where no one tells you the truth." The courtroom collectively held its breath. Rourke's jaw clenched. "I run this courtroom," she hissed. "This is my domain, not yours." Jordan tilted his head slightly. "And it seems you've forgotten that the law is not personal property." A ripple of murmurs spread through the gallery, and then an unexpected shift. Through the side door of the courtroom, a young woman entered, dressed plainly, but with sharp, commanding eyes. She wasn't a court employee. She wasn't part of the audience. Jordan immediately turned toward her, recognizing her instantly. "Maya Park," he said. "I didn't think you'd make it in time." Every head turned. The woman, Maya Park, a fellow FBI field agent, walked confidently toward the bench, carrying a thick file stamped with red federal seal. She placed it directly on the judge's bench without a word, then turned to Jordan and gave a silent nod. "We've completed the verification," she said firmly. "The evidence she needs, it's all in there." Judge Rourke opened the file. It took only a few pages for her expression to shift. Audio recordings, surveillance footage, formal complaints, all tied to a series of past cases. Cases marked by signs of bias and judicial misconduct. Her own misconduct. This is illegal," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. Jordan stepped forward. "No," he said calmly. "It's the result of a 6-month internal investigation. You were flagged after 2 trials where evidence showed. You intentionally dismissed legal testimony from black witnesses." In that moment, the eyes of everyone in Courtroom Two, from Kimberly to Deputy Cole, no longer looked at Rourke as a judge. They looked at her the way one looks at a defendant, not yet charged but exposed. Judge Evelyn Rourke gripped the edge of the bench. She wasn't smirking anymore. No sarcasm, only silence, the kind that settles when someone realizes they've just slipped from the top. And Jordan, who had held his silence for far too long, still wasn't finished. The air inside Brookhaven's Courtroom 2 had thickened, like smoke from a cigarette left burning too long. No one dared move. Every eye was now locked on Jordan Hale, the man standing at the defendant's table, speaking like the entire courtroom was under his command. Judge Rourke remained perched behind her bench, her hands clenched around the edge like she was trying to anchor herself to the last remnants of her authority. But the color had drained from her face. What remained was the fear of exposure. Jordan took a deep breath. It was time to end the charade. "Your Honor," he said, turning his gaze toward the bench, but his voice carried all the way to the back of the gallery. "I'm not here today just to defend myself." A wave of murmurs swept through the room. Deputy Cole straightened like he'd been summoned. ADA Kimberly Tran set down her pen. The pretending was over. Jordan continued, eyes still locked on Rourke. "I was assigned by the Federal Bureau of Investigation to conduct an internal investigation into repeated judicial misconduct within this very courtroom. The subject of that investigation," he paused, his gaze slicing like a blade, "is you, Judge Evelyn Rourke." Bang. No one could say where the sound came from. Maybe someone dropped a bag. Or maybe the entire courtroom just lost its grip on silence all at once. Rourke's mouth fell open. She tried to speak, to lash out, but she was already too late. Jordan stepped forward half a pace, placing his hand atop the thick, red-stamped file that Agent Maya Park had brought in. "The evidence we've collected," he said, opening the first few pages. "Photos of case documents, audio transcripts of leaked conversations, statistical breakdowns of racially skewed sentencing, demonstrates a systematic pattern of judicial bias, disproportionately affecting African American litigants and other minority defendants." Rourke hissed through clenched teeth. "You have no right to stand here and make these baseless accusations in my courtroom." Jordan paused. No raised brow, no smirk, just one sentence. One truth that flipped the balance entirely. "No, ma'am," he said. "This courtroom was never yours. And today, it returns to where it belongs, to justice." A smattering of applause broke out at the back of the gallery, like sparks igniting a long-dormant fire. And within seconds, the whole room was alive with the sound. Maya Park stepped forward, her voice clear and unwavering. "You have the right to remain silent, Judge Rourke. Anything you say from this point on may be used as evidence in a federal hearing." Rourke tried to maintain her hardened expression, but the corner of her mouth trembled. For the first time in her entire career, Evelyn Rourke was no longer the one asking the questions. She had become the question, the central figure in a federal investigation. Jordan added calmly, "What you displayed here today, the insults, the contempt, the disregard for civil rights, only confirms why this action is necessary. You are no longer a symbol of justice. You are the reason people lose faith in it." The room fell silent, but it was no longer the silence of control. It was a silence of truth finally named. An eerie stillness fell over Courtroom 2 in the Brookhaven District Courthouse, as if the entire space had suddenly lost power. Only flickering gazes remained, blinking in the shadows of doubt. The eyes that had once focused squarely on Jordan were beginning to shift. ADA Kimberly Tran slid her chair back slightly, set her pen down, removed her glasses, and wiped them with the edge of her blouse. Not to clean them, but to shield the expression on her face. Even she was shaken. The woman she had stood beside through countless trials now stood before her like a collapsing monument of moral collapse. Court Clerk Lisa Mendoza, usually typing without pause, let her fingers hover above the keys. Frozen, her eyes darted from Jordan to Rourke, then to the open folder lying on the judge's bench. Sweat glistened on her forehead, not from heat, but from the overwhelming reality unraveling in front of her. And Deputy Raymond Cole, so long accustomed to nodding at the judge's orders, now stood unusually upright. One hand rested near his belt, not on his weapon, but almost as if he were holding himself back, wondering whether it was time to intervene, or to stand still and let justice resurrect itself. At the bench, Evelyn Rourke still refused to concede her fall. She clung to her authority, like a drowning woman gripping the side of a boat. But unlike every trial before this one, no hand reached out to pull her back up. "You people actually believe this nonsense?" she snapped, scanning the room for sympathy. "I've sat on this bench for nearly 30 years. I am the reason this city has order." Jordan interrupted her, his voice calm, almost clinical, like a doctor removing the final needle from an infected wound. And perhaps the reason it lost its justice. From the back row, an older black man in a janitor's uniform stood up. He placed a hand over his heart and spoke in a deep, steady voice. "She denied me the right to an attorney back in 2011. I've never forgotten the way she looked at me." A young Hispanic woman, holding a baby in her arms, followed. "She called me a lying immigrant girl." Right there in open court. I thought that was normal, but now I realized I was being humiliated, and I didn't even know it. The testimonies came like a dam bursting. One by one, people stood, and one by one, old wounds were named. Rourke's hands began to tremble. She saw it clearly now. Power doesn't vanish in a bang. It leaks quietly, through every pair of eyes that no longer trust you. And now, in the very courtroom that had once been her fortress, she was no longer the one giving orders. She was the one being judged. Jordan Hale turned slowly toward the black leather case by the defense table. Every eye in the room had shifted away from Judge Rourke, the same woman who, only minutes ago, had seemed untouchable. He opened the case, pulled out a thick document file stamped with a bold red seal, "Confidential, Doge," and a heavy cream envelope bearing the insignia of the United States Department of Justice. Every movement Jordan made was precise, as if choreographed from memory. But this wasn't theater. It was real, and for the first time, justice didn't come from the bench, but from the accused. He stepped forward toward the bench, stopping exactly at the courtroom limit line. Deputy Raymond Cole instinctively stepped beside him, not at Rourke's command, but as if something deeper told him, "Follow this man now." Jordan raised the envelope high for the courtroom to see. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a federal arrest warrant, signed by U.S. District Judge Melissa Drake of the Federal Court for the state of Georgia. The named subject is Judge Evelyn Rourke." Something dropped to the floor. A sharp clatter. Someone gasped. Another placed a hand over their chest, unable to believe what was unfolding before their eyes. Evelyn Rourke shot to her feet, her eyes wide and flickering with panic. She tried to recover her tone of authority. No, this is a setup. You have no right to arrest me. I represent the law." Jordan took a half step forward and placed a sealed envelope and warrant copy directly on the bench in front of her. "No one is above the law, ma'am, and there is no immunity. When you've used this courtroom to carry out systematic racial discrimination, it's all recorded. It's all been verified." Rourke yanked at her robe, as if to prove the power still wrapped around her like armor. But then, click, a hidden button beneath the edge of her bench popped loose. A secret compartment swung open, and from it fell a miniature recording device, already switched on and actively recording. The entire courtroom froze. Jordan calmly stepped forward, picked up the device, and held it up for everyone to see. He pressed the playback button, and Evelyn Rourke's voice filled the room, unmistakable, captured from a prior trial. "We don't need lawyers for those immigrants. They'll tear themselves apart eventually." A slap with no hand, a sentence with no gavel, but louder than any death sentence. The evidence she had hidden was now in the hands of a federal agent, and in full view of the public. Rourke flinched, her body jolting as if the blood had been drained from her face. I didn't know that was there. Who put..." "You don't need to say anything else," Jordan interrupted. "From this moment on, anything you say can and will be used as evidence." Deputy Raymond Cole stepped forward, one hand already resting on his handcuffs. "Judge Rourke, I need you to stand up." "No, I object. I will appeal this. I'm the authority here," she shouted. But no one in the courtroom was listening anymore. Jordan turned to Assistant District Attorney Kimberly Tran. "Please transfer the case file to the federal court. This trial is no longer under valid jurisdiction." Kimberly nodded, and for the first time during the entire hearing, her eyes met Jordan's with unmistakable respect. The warrant was read aloud. The cuffs clicked shut around Evelyn Rourke's wrists. And in the very place that once served as the untouchable fortress of corrupt authority, she was escorted out, just like the many defendants who had once stood trembling before her, to the whispered echoes of justice finally being restored. The metallic clink of the handcuffs rang sharply. In the same chamber that had once been the sanctuary of Evelyn Rourke's power, now she stood hunched, hands bound behind her back, her judge's robe, once a symbol of untouchable command, slipping off her shoulders, sweat-stained and sagging with desperation. "You people are making a terrible mistake," she shrieked, her voice shrill and weightless. "I'll be back. I'll sue every last one of you. I have friends in Congress, in the Supreme Court. I'm not the kind of person you can treat like this." No one replied. Even the whispers had stopped. The entire room sat frozen, as if watching a monument collapse, toppled by the very bricks it was built upon. Deputy Cole said nothing. He only held her gently, guiding her step by step down from the bench. The same elevated platform once off limits, without her explicit permission. But now, with cuffs around her wrists and fear in her eyes, she was no longer the lawgiver, but the law-bound. Jordan Hale remained still. No smile, no mockery, just quiet observation. Because he understood, victory wasn't in binding someone's hands. It was in unbinding the fear that had ruled this courtroom for years. In the back row, an elderly black woman, holding a worn notebook, stood. She whispered, not at anyone in particular, but loud enough for all to hear. I used to pray the Lord would let me live long enough to see her no longer sitting on that throne. A young police officer seated in the rear quietly bowed his head, as if offering a silent apology for ever serving a system that once felt untouchable. And then the courtroom doors swung open. The press was already waiting. Cameras flashed. The murmurs from the hallway rolled in like crashing waves. They weren't there for a trial. They were there for a moment in history. Rourke stumbled as she stepped out, the sharp noon sunlight hitting her pale face. A woman who once embodied justice was now nothing more than a living reminder of abused power. Jordan followed her out a few steps behind, then paused in the frame of the courthouse doorway. He didn't speak, but it was his silence, his posture, the glint of his FBI badge catching light beneath his sleeve, that said everything. That no one stands above the law. That justice, when reclaimed, doesn't need to scream. That power is not immune to truth. His face didn't show triumph, only the quiet relief of a man who had done what needed to be done, even if it meant months of hiding in shadows, just to bring the truth back into the light. And today, before the eyes of the world, Evelyn Rourke, who had once made so many bow their heads, bowed hers for the first time. 1 hour after Evelyn Rourke was escorted out of the courthouse, Courtroom Two at Brookhaven returned to order, but not the old order, not the kind ruled by fear or silence, but an order reborn through justice. From the side door, a temporary presiding judge entered, a white man in his early 50s, composed, sharp-eyed, and calm in demeanor. He approached the bench with the case file in hand. He didn't waste words. After reviewing the full procedural record, his voice rang out clearly. And based on newly submitted federal documentation, I hereby declare this case fully dismissed. All charges against Mr. Jordan Hale are dropped, effective immediately. The gavel came down, but this time it carried no intimidation. It was a final affirmation that justice had been restored. Jordan remained seated at the defendant's table for a moment, his eyes closed. A slow breath left his chest, as if he had just paid off a debt that wasn't his alone to carry, but one owed by hundreds who had once entered this courtroom with hope and left with nothing but bitterness. When he finally stood, the entire courtroom erupted in applause. No cue, no prompting, just people, ordinary people, saluting an extraordinary act. Not because Jordan was an FBI agent, not because he exposed a corrupt judge, but because he stood up when everyone else had been made to bow. A reporter pushed forward, holding out a microphone. Jordan Hale, do you have anything you'd like to say to the public today? After everything that's just happened? Jordan looked around. The faces of people who once hesitated to even enter a courtroom now stood tall. There was an elderly man holding a child's hand, a laborer still in work uniform from a just-finished shift, and those who had once been judged by the same hand that now wore cuffs. He drew in a deep breath, then spoke, his voice not loud, but ringing like the final toll of a long-awaited bell. The law doesn't belong to any one person, not even the one sitting in the highest seat of the courtroom. It doesn't belong to me. It didn't belong to Rourke. The law belongs to the people. There was a beat of silence, and then a wave of applause. Not wild cheering, but slow, steady, purposeful applause, like saying farewell to a broken past and welcoming back a forgotten truth. Jordan bowed his head in quiet thanks. He turned to Deputy Cole. "Thank you for doing the right thing," Jordan said. Cole nodded, eyes distant, voice low. Someone had to start. Today it was you. Tomorrow maybe it's me. As Jordan descended the courthouse steps, a young boy reached out and handed him a miniature paper American flag. "Keep this," the boy said. "My mom says justice came back today." Jordan closed his hand gently around the flag. Deputy Cole held the door open for him. Kimberly Tran placed a hand over her heart and nodded as he passed. Lisa Mendoza, the court clerk, quietly removed a nameplate reading E. Rourke from the judge's bench. No one told her to, but some things simply needed to end. Jordan stepped down the courthouse stairs one last time, where the light of the afternoon had shifted into something softer. The small paper flag still rested in his pocket. He pulled it out, unfolded it, and watched it flutter in the breeze. Then, softly, not at anyone in particular, yet meant for everyone, he said, "Justice doesn't begin in courtrooms. It begins with the courage of each person who chooses not to look away when something is wrong." And with no spectacle, no grand farewell, Jordan Hale quietly walked away from the courthouse. Behind him, a city began to see justice with new eyes. Ahead of him was a nation still full of places that needed to hear the same truth. The law does not belong to power. The law belongs to the people.